You're watching Mental Health with Marcie, and I'm Marcie. In today's video, we are going to talk about online or virtual therapy and if I recommend it. And so I will talk specifically from my experiences with online and in-person therapy. I will have a big caveat here that everyone's experiences are different. Of course, it depends on, your connection with your counselor, etc. But I will speak from my experiences and let you know at the end if I recommend it. So, fun fact, I actually went to my first therapist through an online service, BetterHelp. And so you may have some preconceived notions about BetterHelp. This was before all the controversies and whatnot. But I will say that I really liked the ease of access, and the barrier to entry was very low. And so by that, I mean, in order to sign up for such a service, it was there's very other similar ones, monthly subscriptions and things like that are very similar to BetterHelp. But it was very easy to sign up because you could just sign up online. And I actually did this in the middle of the night one time. I was like, I need to do this. And that's the kind of thing that it made it so easy to sign up and really start the process with a counselor. And so for me, I liked my time there. I mean, of course, it just depends on what counselor you get, and kind of your relationship. But it was my first ever experience with therapy. And so I will say, having just the ease of doing it online and not having to call somebody to set up an appointment or looking through, thousands of providers, they just give you one. It was very easy. And so it made it easy to start the process. After about maybe 6 months or so, I ended up transitioning to a different therapist off of the platform, but it did make it easy for me to get started. And so, I do. While I personally probably wouldn't use such a service again, mostly for cost reasons, but it depends on if you have health insurance or not. I wouldn't use it again, but it made it very, very easy to start the process. And I'm so glad that the service was available and I was able to sign up and get my foot in the door for therapy. And so in that case, I would recommend, virtual therapy in that regard, just that it's easy, it's easier access wise. Just for me personally, from the cost perspective, I didn't realize with my health insurance how much therapy would be. And so it actually ended up being a lot more expensive with the virtual service than it was just with a regular therapist. However, I recognize that's not the case for everyone. Depends on your health insurance, if you have health insurance, what they cover, etc. And so that's just something that I think was a big deterrent for me from the beginning, was the cost. And I didn't realize that I shouldn't say it's that affordable. It just depends on, obviously, your insurance, but it was more affordable than I realized, just because it's they throw out these numbers. And so again, it depends on, what services you have available. But yeah, I just found that going the traditional therapy route was a lot cheaper with my personal health insurance plan. So that was my first experience with virtual therapy. And then I transitioned to, I guess I'll call traditional therapist, in-person therapy. And then it was a while later, how much long? Maybe a year later, then the pandemic hit. And so we transitioned to virtual again. And so it was the experience where I had someone in person before. So I had met her, I'd had many sessions in person, but then now it was all through the screen. And also what was interesting just about the difference between the two. So I actually, in my BetterHelp experiences, I only did over the phone therapy. I didn't do video, which I don't know why. I'm sure they must have offered it. I have no idea why I didn't do video. But this, in transitioning, pandemic wise, I transitioned over to virtual. It was video calls, and I really liked doing those types of calls just because for me, it was a lot easier than having to get dressed, go drive somewhere, wait in a waiting room, then go and do the therapy, then drive home. And it ended up being like twice as much time if you were going in person. And so I really liked being able to just like schedule it as like an hour meeting or whatever. And so it's like you could just hop on from something to the next, and it was very easy. And so what's interesting is I would still lump those into the same category as virtual, but I would say it's a little bit different because it's still that traditional therapy, but it just happens to be through a screen. And so some people don't like that. Some people are like, well, they can't see your full body language and kind of how, you're reacting. You can only see, from whatever up. And so, I don't know, for me, I just felt really comfortable doing that because I am on a lot of video calls. I have a lot of people that work across the country that are not co-located with me. And so I end up like being on video calls all the time. So to me, it was just like another extension of that. And it was very easy and felt very comfortable for me. But that's also, again, because I don't like to get dressed and I'm very introverted. So I don't like to like leave my house. But that's just me. And so I had a really positive experience with that. And then, pandemic continued. I switched therapists eventually. And this was a therapist I've never met. And so I guess similar to the BetterHelp one, I had never met him before. And so I did just virtual because that's all that was offered at the time because pandemic. And so I was able to, have those virtual appointments. And to me, it just felt so natural and normal, excuse me, and things like that. And so I really liked it personally. But again, it was a traditional therapist, not through like a paid monthly subscription service. And so it was just a little bit different in my experience personally. But yeah, eventually I did end up meeting this therapist in person once got a little bit further into the pandemic, a little bit out of it. We were able to meet in person, but even now, I actually do all of my sessions virtually still, even though there's the possibility to do it in person if I like. But for me, it's just so much easier to have that that virtual aspect and having not to have to like I said, get dressed, brush my hair. Like half the time this is what I look like. Or actually I look worse because I usually don't brush my hair for therapy, but it's fine. Or I just wear my glasses or whatever because it doesn't matter. It's just your therapist. But I feel like if you have to like leave the house, you have to like put on shoes that are not slippers. And who wants to do that? But I think everyone has their own experiences. A lot of people like that in-person interaction. And I think there is a difference between, a service with therapists versus just like a person who owns their own practice. However, that doesn't mean that the virtual service therapists are any less qualified necessarily. Can't speak to their qualifications, but doesn't mean that they're worse or not as good. But I would just say from a personal perspective, it just didn't make sense from a cost perspective to go that service route. But I mean, it really just depends on what you like and really what works for your budget. But again, I just would highly, highly recommend any kind of virtual therapy if it gets you in the door. And so I guess, the virtual metaphorical door because if you're at home, you're not getting in the door. But it's sometimes there's just this overwhelming stigma and like barrier where this feels impossible to do in-person therapy. And it just seems like you can't, yeah, you can't do it. And it's like, if you're going to do nothing or you're going to do virtual therapy, I would highly recommend virtual therapy. In a lot of cases, like I said, I liked it better than in person personally. It just depends on what you like. And obviously, everyone's experiences may differ, especially with different, therapy, monthly services versus traditional therapists, what have you. Everyone's experiences will differ, but I just really, really love that, out of the pandemic came this more resurgence in virtual therapy, and especially virtual therapy being covered by insurance. And that would be at least for me, traditionally, the more traditional therapists, they didn't used to have telehealth appointments covered by insurance. And so that's been really, really helpful, I think, especially for those of us who just don't want to leave the house and it's just a barrier to entry to have to do that. And so it just makes it, in my opinion, so much easier to access therapy by having it virtual. And so again, I would be curious your experiences. Have you tried virtual therapy? Have you tried any of those, monthly subscription services? Have you gone the traditional therapist, swear by in person? What's been your experience with therapy and what do you recommend? Again, it's hard to like imagine like going back in person, even though not like COVID wise, just again, like the convenience of it is just hard to imagine. I can go back in person if I want. But I just really love the flexibility of virtual personally. But yeah, let me know, what you like to do. Have you thought about doing therapy and just haven't tried it yet? What's stopping you from trying? I would love to hear all of that in the conversation and comments down below. So thank you so much for watching and stay well, my friends.